Okay, now we should be live. We have 75 watchers. Welcome everyone. Let's wait a few minutes. Okay, so welcome everyone to this 20 seconds UXTalk about creativity and UX. We're about to start this conversation that will be an opportunity to discuss about topics related to UX that sometimes are not so much referred. So before starting, let me share my screen. So do you copy? Yeah, hi Gabriele. Okay, a few information, feel free to use the chat to interact. We will try to collect all your questions in order to answer in a dedicated moment right after the two speeches, the two keynotes. So basically, just keep attention on the keynotes. Just focus on the topics and collect all your questions, because we will have the chance to interact with the speakers and to ask them what you need to know. Okay. So just to have a cold start like this with technical issues. Let me talk about this UXTalk. UXTalks are a moment of sharing topics and information and thoughts about the UX world. They are enabled by POLI.design and Experience Design Academy, and this talk is fostered by the Master in User Experience Psychology by Cattolica and the higher education course in User Experience Design. That are two didactical paths that we deliver in our academy. So you can follow our academy, our channels where we communicate the upcoming events. So these are the two products. The UXTalk were born 4 years ago in order to gather a community of professionals, international professionals, that can share their experience, their expertise, and some best practices and provoking thoughts about UX. Regarding the Master in UX Psychology, I would like to communicate that calls are open. So basically, submissions are open, and the Master is currently running its first edition at Cattolica. We are hoping to go back to the Master as soon as we can. The second edition is already confirmed and ready to start on January. And of course, if you are interested, you can just frame that QR code and access to the Cattolica website and have all the information you need. Or anyway, you can write us and just ask us questions about the Master. So the Master is about delivering professionals that are able to deal with both user experience and psychology in wide context, in great organizations. I don't know if you, Andrea, I would invite Andrea, that is the main director of the Master, to share a few thoughts about this experience that we have started.
So, good evening. Thank you for hosting this event, Davide. So the Master is, as you said, will help students to develop, the knowledge and skills required to become a user experience specialist, which is one of the most demanded careers in the digital era. Just think that LinkedIn put user experience as one of the 5 top skills that today people have in order to be successfully introduced in the job market. So user experience today is one of the trendiest topics in the industry, but it's difficult to find the professionals who have both the skills of design and the skills of psychology that are needed, and this evening talk will deepen this aspect, that are needed in order to understand the expectations of the user, the characteristics of the user, to profile the user, but also to test the effectiveness and the experience in its value. So this is why these are the main values of the master. It's an international master. In the first edition, we are running we are very happy of the result, and we welcome your application. If you need more information, just contact us on the website.
Good evening, everyone. I'm greeting all people that are joining us in the chat. So, Andrea, I don't know if you would like to introduce yourself even better than I did.
Okay, so I'm a professor in psychology at the Catholic University, and I'm the co-director of the International Master User Experience Psychology, together with Venanzio Arquilla, who is the other co-director for POLI.design. It's an experience to integrate the experience of Politecnico and Università Cattolica in this product, in this program, and so my focus is on the psychology of experience and human-computer interaction. And in my entire career, I have been collaborating with several other, disciplines ranging from design to engineering to computer science, and this is why I feel so, happy to have this great team this evening talking about a topic that can only be addressed from, different viewpoints.
Okay, thank you. Regarding me, just a quick introduction. I am the technical director of the Master in User Experience Psychology for the Polytechnical side, and of the higher education course in User Experience Design by POLI.design. So I would like to thank all the students that are following us right now from both the two courses. And I am also basically a UX designer, so I work with big companies and big agencies, but also as well little startups and other institutions in order to deliver digital products and services. So this is basically my goal. And I also focus at Politecnico di Milano about products for people with ASD, for autistic people. We basically work on physical products that can help in improving the quality of life for these folks. So basically, let's start. This was just an introduction, just to get to know each other and to understand who you have in front, okay? But let's start with this conversation. And in order to start with this conversation, we would like to start with a provoking quote. This is a popular quote in Italy, selected by Enzo Mari, the product designer Enzo Mari, that passed away a few months ago. And when interviewed during a TV show on the Italian television, he was asked about creativity, and he started this rant about creativity and telling that creativity was about generating shit or bad stuff, bad objects, criticizing basically the absence of a methodology. He says that every design process shall be fostered by passion, by attempts, trials, and methodology. So this is, I think, a good starting point to start reflecting about creativity by understanding what is not, maybe. And I think this could be an interesting starting point. But on the other hand, we can mention also another famous Italian product designer, that is Bruno Munari. And he wrote a book about fantasy and creativity, a very enlightening book, such like the ones that Munari wrote. And in this book, he talked about the capacity of creating meaningful experiences thanks to the link between imagination and reason. So creativity is seen as something that can be methodologically absorbed and used to deliver better products, better scenarios, better usage scenarios. So where's the truth in between these two quotes, these two provoking quotes? Well, let's find out by listening to our speakers. And I think that they will have the answer, or maybe they will have even further questions to these two provoking quotes. So let me introduce this evening panel, or morning for Joan that is currently watching us. We will have the first keynote by Johan Leegren. He's an award-winning film director, writer, and story consultant. So we would like to introduce this talk with someone that has creativity as his main purpose. I don't want to spoil anything, so let's go ahead. And the second speaker of this evening is Elisabetta Balconi. She is a creative director and experienced designer with a huge experience in big agencies here in Italy, working for both national and international projects. Then now she has become a freelance consultant, so she will talk about her own experience. But I don't want to be the only one to talk this evening. I think that I'm going to stop if you, Andrea, don't want to add anything new. So I think that we can leave the floor to Johan for his upcoming keynote.
Okay, yes, thank you, Davide. I would like to add just a couple of words. Again, it's a real pleasure to be together once again with you and with our friends. I'm very thankful to you and to the UX Academy for hosting this series of events that is really becoming a reference point for the UX community. So just a few words of context about the relationship between creativity and UX. We live in a very complex society, and creativity is a capacity that is not only useful for innovation, but also for the very surviving of organization and social groups. So the answers to everyday problems are really complex to find, and experience alone often does not help to resolve situations as easily as the pre-pandemic. So no one can foresee the challenges that await us in the post-pandemic world, and to be able to face them successfully, there will be a phenomenal need for creative leaders. So leaders with the capability of flexible thinking, who know how to see complexity as an opportunity and not a risk or limit. So in this context, also user experience professionals must develop their creative potential in order to truly connect with users. And of course, they are challenged every day with complex problems, which they can effectively address thinking on innovative solutions. So designers apply creative thinking to come up with solutions. But the question is then, what creative skills are at stake when it comes to designing an experience? Be this experience related to a movie, a product, a piece of art, or an event you choose. So this is why we invited to address this question to great professionals who in their career they have successfully managed to merge creativity and design, although they operate in different domains. So I don't want to steal more time to Johan and Elisabetta, and I'm very pleased to give the floor to Johan.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. And thank you for allowing me some time with your group this morning. I like the way that Bruno Munari in the introduction here talked about what creativity does. And I think he pegged it up sort of in the sense of what is it that makes something meaningful? And that is very much how I approach the questions of design and user experience, to see not what makes it sell more, not what makes it prettier, but what is it that makes something meaningful and purposeful, that gives it purpose and direction forward. And that sounds in many ways like an obvious way to approach many commercial projects, but I have found over and over again that it stands in very stark contrast to companies trying to pander to a large audience, asking them what they want, and then delivering that. So from a story perspective or from a narrative perspective, it will be a disastrous approach if you want to tell a really good story. So what I would like to try to do today is to take UX and think about UX as narrative. A experience to me is not just a slice in time or a static moment. An experience to me is something that starts on one side and ends on another. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, very much like a story. And if the beginning is the same as the end, it would be a very meaningless story to tell. And we would say that this is not a story that works for us, and we would say that was a useless experience. So with that in mind, if we think about it as a narrative, the beginning will have to lead to something that leads to another thing that then leads to the end in a way that gives all of this together purpose. And Andrea talked about complexity, and I think a lot about complexity when I think about narrative. What is that holds all of this complexity together, and what in itself is complexity and the juxtapositions that come with it? So what I like to try to do today is, when we talk about this, is not to give a prescriptive talk about how to apply UX to some kind of story model, but instead take a step back and see if I can offer you all the tools of narrative. What if we could break down story and narrative into a few essential elements that not make the story great or popular or fancy or glitzy, but the elements that the elements that are required to make a story a story. And without one of these, it simply wouldn't work as a story. Let's see here, if I can figure this out. So one of the things with story is where they start. So if I would come up on, if this was a stage, if I would come out on stage today and say, let me tell you all a story. This story goes as follows. There is a boy that stands at a train station. And then I would just stop the story right there. And I would just let it hang in the air. And the audience at some point would turn to me and say, Johan, that is not a good story. That's a terrible story. And I say, why is that not a story? And although we all intuitively know exactly what's wrong with that, it is actually kind of hard to put your finger on what it is that makes that not a full story. So a boy stands at a train station is not a story. So if you ask the audience at this point, they would say things like, well, nothing happens, you know, why do I care, etc. And that is the fundamental question of story. What is it with something that we are told that makes us pay attention, that makes it meaningful to us, and makes us, and makes us wonder, what is it that's going to come next? So if we think about story, it always starts with the status quo. The image that I have here, of course, is the story of Albert Dürer's The Fall of Man. It's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And when we come into that story, it is very much like a boy stands on the platform waiting for a train. Nothing happens. There are two people that walk around in the perfect garden. They have nothing to worry about. They don't even know that they're naked. And all they do is they walk around and they walk around for, I don't know my Bible well enough, but I think they do this for 1,000,000 years. And I can see the creator standing there and looks down upon his finest and most beautiful creation. After 1,000,000 years, he has seen this over and over and over again, and nothing happens. And that this is the point where he calls something into Eden to make this start, to make something happen in here. So the beginning, all story requires conflict. Why is that of importance to us? Well, it is important for UX designers because when you work with companies, they very, very seldom think about their own products as something that solves real and important problems. So in this particular case, the story starts with some level of conflict. So a boy stands at a train station. What can we do in that situation to make something happen is always the question. And in the Garden of Eden, a story that we all know so well, it is, of course, the fact that they are now being tempted to take the apple and to gain some additional knowledge, but it comes at a very large cost. It comes at the biggest cost humanly imaginable. It is the death of man. So at that point, we are engaged, the story is at work, and we're moving forward. Now, what happens, of course, in this one is that we want to see what happens next. So the question is, in this scenario is, what is it that is interesting and meaningful enough for us in the experience to make it something that we want to stay and see what happens? In UX, it's very much a question of creating something that creates desire, not something that delivers the full experience, but that creates desire and creates a promise for us that we want to be part of and we want to stick around with. And when we think about this, what are experiences, or maybe a better question is there any experience at all where the promise of that experience is in the experience itself? Or are all experiences really just a platform to take us to the next experience that takes us to the next experience that takes us to the next experience? If we think about even just clicking on an icon somewhere, that's not what we are after. That's not what the experience is. That is just a launch pin and a platform to take us to another experience that we haven't had yet. So if we believe that clicking on that button or pushing that thing or dialing that thing or interacting with that UI or that OS or with that product, it is always because we believe there is something on the other side of that action that we take. That is, of course, something that Aristotle would say, and he would describe as both inevitable and surprising at the same time. So what does that mean, inevitable and surprising at the same time? Well, for me, like as a writer and as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, inevitable means that it's something that makes sense in this context, right? So inevitable means that we are in a universe, we are in a narrative story universe, and we need to stay in that. We can't break that one. Even if it's a fictional one, we have to stay within the boundaries that this universe has set up. So one thing happens, the next thing happens, and we stay with that. That makes it inevitable. We don't introduce a bunch of random stuff in it. Surprising means that if it was just inevitable, it's just causal, it's just mechanics. And that takes us back to the beginning of Eden again. Things are just moving around in a circle. We are in status quo, and status quo is death. Inevitable means that it just makes sense, but that is never enough. So something also in how we move forward needs to be surprising. Surprising in the sense that it's something that we could not foresee, that is the promise of something surprising, but it can't be random, and that's why it's inevitable. So from Aristotle's perspective, it's both inevitable and surprising at the same time. So when we think about this as a UX, this is something that every UX needs to promise on every step of the way towards the end by setting something up that then sets up a new beginning that we can then go towards and then promise something new, and so we keep it going. If we don't do that, the users will disengage and we will have a very different experience. Now, we've talked about a few of the elements that belong to story. We talked about it inevitable and surprising, and we talked about conflict. There needs to be a conflict in story. And frankly, the conflict part is probably the biggest part of the elements and something that is most commonly missing when we talk about UX design. Before I get into the original story here, the conflict aspect of this is, I have found something that almost always corporations tend to shy away from. This is not something that they want to talk about. And at the same time, as a storyteller, conflict is the one thing that we thrive on. It's conflict and friction are the things that we remember at the end of the day. At the end of the experience, the only things we remember is the friction, it is the conflict and the excitement and the challenge of that and how we engage with that. It was not the causal mechanics of the story, it was the surprises. It was the twists and turns and the people, the moral dilemmas, those are conflicts. And again, we are no different when we interact with user experiences than we are when we interact with film or fiction, a book or a television program. So a good lens I have found when I work with large corporations is to take a step back and say, okay, if the story structure here, if the conflict was laid out in a narrative arc, is this something that anyone would ever want to engage with and engage with fully? Because at the end of the day, back to Bruno Munari, what is it that makes something meaningful? It is how we engage and the promise that we see in that story that makes it meaningful for us. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So we haven't covered all of the essential elements of story yet, but if you would allow me, it actually makes sense to take a step back here and say, what are the, from my perspective, what are the origins of story? Where does story come from and what is that? And the way that I think about that is at the very, very basic one cell entity. So what you have in the image here, these are one cell entities that swim around in some weird protein mix. And what they do is at times, they send out pheromones. And these pheromones attract other one cell things. And what's interesting about this for me, and what I find fascinating of narrative playing out at a microscopic level, is that you don't have an unlimited amount of pheromones. So you have to be these little cells have to be smart enough about when they send it out to attract other cells that they can actually do something with. So what they do is they try to find cells that are not exactly like themselves, but sort of like themselves. So the cells that they're trying to attract are both inevitable, but also surprising at the same time. And when these cells come together, they go together, and then I don't know exactly how this works. I'm not a biologist, but they open up and they start to share DNA. So what was a one cell is now a two cell entity, and therefore we have a higher level of complexity. So back to Andrea's point early on, I am very much one to believe that we should embrace the complexity. So the more the complexity we can embrace within a meaningful framework, or as I would call it, within a meaningful narrative, a single narrative, the better we're off and the more interesting and the more alive this experience will be. So from a cellular perspective, story is very much there and very much alive. When we then crawl up onto Earth as animals, we look around, and one of the things that we do when we do this is we learn from our experiences. So the little fish crawls up on the beach and it learns that certain things hurt and certain other things does not hurt, and we sort of evolve from here. when we become primates, we look around, and one of the reasons why we are at the top of the food chain is because we are really good at a few different things. We are, first of all, we're really good at playing out scenarios in our heads. That says something like this: the grass is swaying over here. The grass is swaying over here. It doesn't look like it's swaying by the wind. Therefore, it might be an animal, and that makes sense for me to go up a tree and hide right now. So we played out a scenario that hasn't happened yet in our head. So this is a story that we tell ourselves that has something to do with reality. It is a way for us to play something out without actually having to do it. So very much like a film or a book. When we get better at this, we start to do this at more complex levels. We start to do this at the social level. So I would meet with, say, our next speaker, Elisabetta, and I would look at her and I would try to gauge who this person is. And human beings are very, very good at gauging who the other person is and what their stories are. So partly why we are so high up at the food chain today is because we're really, really good reading other people and playing out scenarios together with them that either make sense for us or does not make sense for us. So in a sense, we tell ourselves imaginary little stories all the time that then makes our world either a better one or not something that is good. Again, we are looking for promises around us that are worth pursuing. We can't do those all in reality because it would take too long and be way too dangerous. So instead, we play this out in our heads. And then this is, of course, what children do as well. They play with things. They play family. They play with cars. They play with dolls. They play with balls. All of these things they do. Play is very much a narrative and a story activity at heart. All they're doing is they're playing out an imaginary scenario to see what works and what doesn't work. And from that one, that's how they learn. That's how they learn their skills about reality. And that's how they learn their skills about social interactions, because it's much more fun to play with other people. Anyway, so that's just a precursor to what comes next. So all story to me is play. All UX is an abstraction of some level of play or scenario building. And a good example of this is when we see a film and the hero, let's take an action film like a James Bond film. It doesn't matter which one we do, but let's take an action film. James Bond is hanging from a window with one hand. He is hurt, he is shot, and our heart rates go up. We get a little warmer, we get excited, and somehow we really want James Bond. We are excited. We really want James Bond to survive this. Now, if we would stop the film right there and ask ourselves, does this make any sense? It really doesn't. First of all, James Bond has survived 24 films before this one. He is not going to die in this one, I promise. He will end up okay, and he will end up with a leading lady at the very end. It's just how it always works. But yet still, we feel excitement. Why is that? Why do we care about Bond? Because, of course, it is not about James Bond. It's about us. We project ourselves onto James Bond and to the situation, and therefore we make it ours. This is a very important part of how story works. And as much as other writers hate this notion, I keep saying it. As a writer of a film or a book, we only write half of the story. The other half of the story is the audience that comes in and makes it their story. If the story is open enough for us to project ourselves into this work, it becomes a very positive experience. If the experience is too prescriptive or too preachy, we back away because there's no room for us in this story, and it doesn't work. So how does that technically function and how does that technically work? So in the 1916, there was a Russian gentleman called Kuleshov who did a film experiment with audiences, and it would work as follows. He would show a 4-second clip of a film, a black and white film, and the images that you see on the slide they are from that film. So Kuleshov would show 4 seconds of a man looking at camera, and then he would show an image of a bowl of soup, and then he would show an image of the same man again for 4 seconds, and he would ask the audience what they felt was going on, what was the arc between the first image and the second image, and everyone would say, well, first you see here clearly that the man is hungry, and then there is soup somehow, and then after that he feels satisfied. And on the second one we have a man here who is something, and then there's a dead child, which is terrible, and the man is obviously very sad. And in the next one there is a lovely lady on the sofa, and so the man goes from to a excited and happy state. And of course the image of all of these men is the exact same clip that plays over and over again. So it is us, the audience, that infers meaning into all of this. So this is the juxtaposition that happens in story, in good story. And it is the juxtaposition that gives us enough room to project our own stories and worries and dreams and hopes into the story, where we make the story our own. Other examples of this, of course, is from a psychological perspective, apophenia is nothing more than human beings cannot fathom the world being random or meaningless. It is the most terrifying thing that we can imagine. So even if you present humans with random data points or random images, we will use our heads very, very hard to ascribe meaning and sequence to those random events. So again, this is the important part. It doesn't matter if it actually makes sense in reality, we will project that onto it. And that's the imagination and the creativity that happens in good story, where it's not just us absorbing a story, but us taking a story and making it our own, and thereby telling our own story and recreating it. So the act of listening is also and the act of looking is also very much an act of writing your own story in the story that was served up to you. And the same thing goes for abstraction. So when you think about UX, or you think about design, or you think about anything, abstraction is a very big part of it. If it's too concrete or too real, there is no room for us. So we have to lift it up somehow and make it abstract. And just by making it abstract, we create abstraction between the abstraction and the reality that it prescribes or signifies. And it is in this gap between these two that I can come in and make this story my own. This is the juxtaposition that we saw in the Kuleshov experiment. This is the most often used when we talk about context. Much art is created to challenge context. So there becomes a tension between the context and what we put into that context. That's why we pay attention. That's what makes it meaningful to us. And when we see that, we go, oh, that's clever. Now we're trying to figure out how these two hang together and tie together. And again, we made the story our own. And that, again, becomes conflict. And we love conflict. That's the best possible part. When we are really good at this, we can stretch out the tension between context and the actual object, or between abstraction and reality, and still make it coherent. So that's when it becomes surprising, yet still inevitable. If we now take this down a level and we think about UX as this meaningful friction, this meaningful juxtaposition, conflict, abstraction, all of this good stuff. It is worth noting the reality that many of us are or have or will be working in. Corporations aren't necessarily on the same wavelength here. And I think this is why narrative is such a beautiful tool to not only keep ourselves sane and alive, but also approach corporate projects to create something that is meaningful, not just what the client wants. So the notion of authenticity is something that I've always hated in marketing projects. It doesn't make any sense for most corporate clients. I am rabid in this sense, and I will work very hard with clients to make sure that we find other ways to do it. But when the client comes to you and says, we would like something that's authentic. Well, I usually say that, well, authentic to me would be if the advertising would look something like this. If you buy this project or this product, we will get rich and then we can buy a new car. That is truthful and authentic. That's obviously not what they would like to see, but that starts to challenge what is authentic, because you cannot fake good story. You can't fake intentions. Remember what we talked about in the original story. When I meet Elisabetta, for example, when I see her, I know, because that's how we got to the top of the food chain, I am very good at noting if she's lying or if she's pretending. That's what humans are good at. We can't fake that. And what we're looking for is intent. The same thing is true in products, in UX, in advertising, and in branding. We don't buy lies. At best, we set aside the obvious lies and we buy the product anyway because that's all we have. We need to talk about money in this context. Money cannot be a goal for a story. It's the worst story platform ever, because money doesn't mean anything in itself. There is nothing there on the other side of money. It's a universal token. So when big corporations talk about making money, it's very hard to get behind that narrative because there is nothing in there for me. It doesn't mean anything. Money, the value of money is only the plans that you have for it. And because they don't have any plans for it other than to give it to the shareholders, it becomes a boring story. This is not a political statement. It's a narrative statement. We have other terms that we are hit with all the time. I've spent a lot of time trying to save the designers over at Amazon, for example. They talk a lot about customer-centric design and user experience as ease of use. And they spend more money on user research than any company in the world, basically. And what they do is they say, you know, for money reasons, we like to be in this category. Now we're going to go out and ask the market what the market wants, and then we're going to make that product, right? That's how they work. That's what they do. And they're really good at that. They have a machine that does it and deliver that's really quick. But if you put that into a narrative perspective, it's the worst possible approach to creating something that is meaningful. If I would do the same with the story, and I would say, what kind of story do you want, Andrea? And Andrea would tell me, like, it would be something nice that if it was uplifting and romantic. And then I would say, well, exactly what characters would you want? So Andrea is basically writing the story at this point. There is nothing inevitable because the story hasn't been thought out yet. And there is nothing surprising, and this is important, there is nothing surprising because you cannot surprise yourself. You cannot surprise yourself. The author has to do that. A key component of story. And the last thing I'll get into, and then I promise to wrap this up very quickly, is design by committee, which is another thing that happens for us designers. We're invited in as an expert from the outside, and then we sit in a room with 12 other people who all are smart and good and wants to do the right thing. The problem with that is, of course, that you cannot fake confidence. So the product, much like a story, at the end of the day, needs to have one voice, not 12. Because when a product or an experience has several different voices, it starts to pull in different directions at the same time. That does not work. We need to, as an audience or as a user for a product, we need to be taken by the hand by the author. And the author needs to say, this is going to be weird, this is going to be wonderful, but take my hand and come with me, and I'm going to take you on a journey that is going to be absolutely weird and wonderful. And then we do that, but we need to trust the author that he actually has a plan for this journey at that point. If there was 12 people stretching out their hand in all kinds of different ways, we would just be confused. And that's what most products are today, which sometimes is a small problem, it's just a bad design. But when we start carrying the products around with us in our pockets day in and day out, and these are products that live with us, they start to create a relationship with us. We infer intent into all things that that cell phone does or that smartphone does with us. We wonder if that was a person or a character in the film, what does it want? And because it's acting completely random, often extremely selfish, it is basically, from a clinical perspective, it is psychotic in its behavior. So our job is to create something with the complexity of a phone, but that, back to Andrea's point, the complexity, it has to be held together by a single narrative, a single purpose and direction. And with that, I say thank you for listening. I'll be very happy to take questions in a little bit once Andrea tells me that we're doing that. And to that end,
yeah.
Thank you. All I will say is this is, I think about that Albert Dürer copper etching again. And if you look at it, and I'm going to go back just for a very, very brief second to the beginning of this. Let's see if I can do this. When you look at the, I don't know how to go back here. Okay, I'm going to do this. Take a look here. We were in Garden of Eden. You look at the very details at the bottom of this image. It is the most fascinating, brilliant, and clever little thing that Albert Dürer built into this image. We talked about status quo. Adam and Eve have not had the apple yet, so the world stands still and everything just moves in one circle year in and year out. But this is right, this image is taken or captured right before the apple is going to be had. And if you look at it, there is a mouse right by Adam's foot. And Adam's foot is kind of tilted up a little bit, just about to step on the mouse's tail. And right next to the mouse is a sleeping cat. So what this tells me, this is the promise of a story that is about to start. And the second this apple has been had, the story is going to put in motion. So not only do I, when I see this, my favorite image of all time from a narrative perspective, when I see this image that I love, I don't just see the beginning of man, I also very much see the beginning of story and the creation of story. But because without that, we would have no story to tell about Garden of Eden. If Adam and Eve did not eat the apple, there would be no story to tell. And that's if you glance up in the image, the very top right corner, you can see a very depressed goat standing at the top of a mountain. You see it up here? That goat in that status quo is basically going, I give up, there is nothing happening here. But that's what I think about story. And that's what I think that us UX designers can deliver to a very wide audience. If we deliver on story, we break the status quo, allow people to play in it. And as such, it is very much for me, story is something, it's an instrument and a tool that delivers hope. It's not just status quo. There are ways forward, and there are ways for us as human beings to play in that story. And it's with agency, we have control over that story because the author only writes half of the story. We are allowed to write the other half. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. So thank you very much for this amazing, inspiring talk. It's really great to listen to this mix of different perspectives on experience and storytelling. So now there is space for a couple of questions before introducing Elisabetta's talk. And then we will have another session of questions at the end of Elisabetta's talk. So there was a question actually in the chat by Yair Villanueva. I'm not sure if Yair is still connected. I'm going to read it. In terms of using storytelling for design, would you consider best practices to be repetitive storytelling? Going further, would you consider repetitive storytelling to be potentially detrimental?
I very much do, because I think that it fails the main criteria, which is it has to be inevitable, which is repetitive, but it also has to be surprising. So to the extent that the repetitiveness is simply just the same story over and over again, yes, it is very much something that is detrimental to a meaningful and new and transcendent and therapeutic at best experience. So yes, I would feel like that's detrimental.
Okay, great. Is there any more question from the audience? Otherwise, I have a question.
Please.
Okay, so my question is, what is the difference, in your opinion, between telling a story and designing an experience? What is the relationship between an experience and a story? Do we need to superimpose a story to experience to increase the intensity of the experience, or the other way around?
I think that's a really good question, and Andre, I think I will actually add a slide to when I make this presentation again next time. Thank you for that question. I don't think that we can just superimpose a story on design and that will make it better. So when I talk about UX design, I think about that as a narrative arc. So one way to answer your question is to say, what is the difference between story and narrative? So a story to me is something that has a beginning and an end, and it has a defined beginning and an end. So if I tell you what happened from beginning till end, I just told you a story. A narrative, on the other hand, is a very different thing. It just sets up the structure for stories to be told within. So that's the big difference. So I think when I look at UX, it's usually a mistake to, we hear these terms all the time, right? It's like corporate storytelling and all that. So they tell us stories about this and stories about that. That's not a narrative structure that necessarily makes sense. It could just be random, interesting stories. A narrative is the structure that sets up a conflict, and the players in that world that plays to and works to come through and conquer that conflict. That's a narrative. It doesn't have an end yet. And it's because it doesn't have an end yet that we, the audience or the consumer, we are invited into that. So in the best relationship between a corporation and the user, we would all say together, this is a problem. It is an important and meaningful problem. Now the corporation is going to do this, the product is going to do this, and you, the user, are going to be able to do this if you so choose. That's a narrative.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's a very clear answer. There is space for one more question. Otherwise, we can introduce the next speech by Elisabetta, and then we will have a second round of questions. So I think it will be a nice discussion involving also the panel. So thank you again, Johan, for your speech.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Elisabetta, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, yeah. Let me share my screen.
Are you able to share?
Oh, okay. Are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Elisabetta Balconi, and I'm very glad to be here with you today. And thanks, Johan, for your speech. It was very, very inspiring, and we are on the same page on many, many topics that I'm gonna go through in a bit. I'm an independent creative director and experienced designer, and I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to walk through my experience here today. And yeah, we're going to talk about designing experiences, and in particular, digital experiences. That is what I do. I worked for a lot of years, actually, in digital agencies and digital studios. That means advertising agencies such as Leo Burnett and AKQA, and communication and design studios such as Lowe. That is my latest agency job before deciding to become a freelancer. And here in these agencies, I worked with a team of people, a team of creative people that were on the same page in order to create something fun and something meaningful, of course. And together, as a cohesive team, what we did was, for example, a lot of stuff on a daily basis. For example, art direction, of course, and creative direction, and UI design, and UX design, and then interaction design and motion design. So all these activities were involved on a daily basis in each and every project that we had to deal with. So in this complex set, you can imagine, you just can imagine the importance of having a strong team, a cohesive team that works together on the same page, towards the same direction, to create a narrative, and as Johan would say, and then a story. And our goal here with all these skills and on our daily job was to create something that connected with people. So something that was meaningful, that gives personal significance. And these are just some of a couple of examples of the stuff we did, just to show you what's the kind of projects that I worked on. And here, for example, you see a project that we did for a fashion brand that wanted another way and a more interesting way to show a collection of products. So instead of just showing products, we decided to show a universe, a story, a world where these products, of course, lived, but there was something more to see than just what the brand wanted to sell. And in the same way, also this project represents something like that. So this is an immersive experience, as the one before, that tells a story and sets a narrative around a certain product. So, for example, here, the product, of course, is a sneaker, but the story was to let artists that are the name that you're seeing on the right side of the screen tell their own story about that sneaker. So this website was a collection of artworks that these people made, these talented people made, in order to create storytelling about the product. And then, yeah, we did a lot of other things, something more standard, if you can call it that. For example, e-commerce, and also projects related to art. For example, here the client was also a brand, was also a fashion brand, luxury brand, but they wanted to create something related to their photographers and something related to an exhibition that was going on. So yeah, you see that the markets are very diverse. And back in the days, I worked on something about technology, something about art and corporate social responsibility. So really, I had a lot of fun, I have to say. And as Johan was saying, I think that in these projects, every person involved as a team was bringing ideas, was bringing discussion and therefore value to the project, no matter the role. So you saw earlier that we were seeing a lot of skills, and each and every one of them was represented by a person in the agency. But I really believe that design is a deep dive approach, and it tackles every nuance. So you really need to have a good team and a strong team in order to create something that is meaningful. And in our case, an experience that is memorable and surprising, and it is worth sharing. So I know that here today there are a lot of people coming from a lot of different backgrounds, and they want maybe to are working already or want to work in many different fields, but user experience is in every part of the project. So as I like to say, we are all designers, no matter the role, no matter the market, no matter the project, but we are all designers, and each professional role, each professional skill contributes to create a well-orchestrated ensemble. And yeah, today I'm gonna talk to you about the art director's point of view. I'm an art director, and I'm not gonna talk to you about a project that I worked on in agencies, but today I'm here to talk to you about a personal project that I created at the end of last year, just before deciding to becoming a freelance. Of course, I will show you what's the designer's point of view, but inside a broader approach that is of course the process of design. So and it tackles every kind of problems, and it tackles every kind of questions, and it involves every figure, every professional figure in the team and in the process. So for example, one question that designers and UX designers and UI designers, motion designers all have in common is, for example, when I'm starting a project from scratch, I ask myself, the team asks itself, what should the user see? What should the user experience? What do I want to tell? How do I want to tell it? And so the whole team, the whole team has questions like this, and we have to be very cohesive and very well organized to, of course, to go in the same direction. So the personal project that I chose to show you about, to show you, is this photography and design project that was born from my trips to Scotland over the years, and it's something that I wanted to create just after the end of this year, to create something that could really speak for me and for my job, and that truly represented me as a professional. And so I missed very much the landscapes of Scotland and these rugged and gloomy and yet mesmerizing landscapes. And I wanted a way to create something that reminded people of the feeling that I had while I was being there. So this is why I came up with this project. And the main reason is that after 13 years in this agency that you just saw, I just started out as a freelancer, and this project could really help me to have a clear idea of how exactly present myself and my work. And this can be very difficult at first, because you think about job titles, descriptions, and so on, but it's like a void container, right? What you really want to say is what you do, what you like to do, what your interests are. So I had the necessity to create something that would help me speak for myself. And of course, in order to support my official portfolio, my agency portfolio. And so I think you could say it's like a business card, right? It brings into play all of my skills, all of my professional skills, and it definitely helped me define what kind of professional I am and what my interests are. And so, of course, it could help also other people, potential clients that want to work with me, to understand and to have a clear idea of how I can help, of course. And yeah, last but not least, I really had a lot of fun experimenting and play around and stay up to date with software. So it was really a great idea that it came up to in these fraught times. And I really love these quotes by Simon Dixon and Apoorva Baxi, that are the founders of an agency that I really admire, that is Dixon Baxi. And when I started this project, the big question, the huge question that I had was, how can I leave a mark? How can I create connection with people? How can my story be able to move people, to create connection, to be meaningful? And if you think about this emotional connection that you can have with people, is what really encourages people to go along with your experience. So, for example, to get to the end of a movie or the end of a commercial, or for example, talking about digital experience like mine, to go on and see the site and enjoy the website. Otherwise, people would leave. And for example, if you just think for one moment, how many times did you happen to download an app and delete it after 3 seconds that you have it on your phone? Or for example, the same thing with the website or with the product. So everything must give you some feelings, to create an emotional connection with you. Otherwise, it's just a void container. And this quote is something that I really have to keep in mind when designing, be it something personal or something that you create in your job, in your agency job, for example, or in your official job. And so let's talk about the creative process a little bit. So the first thing that you usually do when you're starting something from scratch, of course, the first things is setting the idea, the main idea, and the goals of the project. So, for example, what do I want to say? Why do I feel the urge to do this project? And in this project about Scotland, it was the feeling that I had related to those memories. I wanted to relive those memories again, and it's like always to. Of course, in this time that we cannot travel, I was trying to recall my feelings. And of course, the goal of the project was to simply share these places with other people, share my experience, share my vision, and of course, share my feelings. And so when you set the idea and set the main goals, what you do is the complex and broad art direction part. So the questions here are, how does the project have to look like? And what is the look and feel that you have in mind when thinking about the story that you want to tell? So the story, you have the idea now. You for sure know what story to tell, but you have to envision how it looks like, how it is, the feeling of the story, visually speaking. And so consequently, what are the design choices that you will make in order to convey your idea? And so in general, what is the overall mood of the project? And to define all those things and to start from a blank page, you start, or at least I usually start by doing mood boards. And mood boards are very helpful, because they give you the opportunity to make an exploration. So this at this point, it's like a very opening. It's a very open approach. You see what you like around, you collect ideas, you collect screenshots and projects from other, and basically what catches your eye. And that could be a great starting point for your idea, for example. So I try to design these huge digital mood boards where I collect everything that I like in order to start thinking about my project and my story. And after that, for example, speaking about this project in particular, photography had a very prominent place in all the project, because I had to create a selection, of course, of all my trips, and I had to do post-production of these images. So, for example, I decided to shoot in black and white because I really wanted to focus not on colors. So I wanted to take out colors and focus on shapes and materials and clouds and fog, because it was really important for my story to highlight those particulars, those elements in my pictures. So I wanted to show the dark side, the gloomy side, the bad weather, the bad weather of Scotland, of those places. And so this design choice, for example, this design choice that was to shoot black and white pictures and then post-produce in order to, for example, highlight the contrast. This was one of the first design choices that I made in order to create my story. So this was really, really important. And last but not least, the order that I wanted to give to my pictures, because envisioning a narrative, envisioning a story, it was really important to focus on what pictures to show first, and then what is the right sequence of images that I have to show in order to really fit within my story. And of course, after defining the mood, the look and feel of photography, I had to deal with color palette and typography. So what is the right color palette to go along with those kind of photography, with those kind of pictures? And for example, the typography as well had an important role. So as you see here in these screens, I kept on doing in creating this exploration, these little tries, these little tentatives in order to understand what I really like. For example, typography had a very fundamental part, because as in the same way that I gave a look and feel to the photography part, I also had to decide what was the right typography in order to fit within my story. So, for example, I could spend days on typography in my work, because I really love to make a lot of layouts, playing around, experiments. But for example, as in photography, I was focusing on rough shapes and contrast. I really wanted to do the same with typography. So, for example, the central one that is a little bit chunky, is a little softer, wouldn't work for me, because I would really love to find a typography that really went along with the photography part. And another, and I would say maybe the most important part, as Johan also was saying, is user interaction. So we see that the most important thing in any experience is how people interact with it. So remember the void container, right? So you have to give something to people. You have to create the element of surprise. You have to give a clear vision of how people have to interact with your experience. So, for example, the questions here were, for me, were what will people see first in terms of hierarchy, and what is the first thing that maybe people will interact with, and how. So how should I showcase content to them, in which order, and what are my priorities in order to show an interface, some photography. So what is the priority, and what is the better way, so also in terms of user interaction, to reflect and to showcase my storytelling, my personal storytelling. And of course, here, for example, you see that I created these little MVPs, so these little tentatives that would really help me find the right way. So I designed, and then I prototyped, and then I went back to design, and then I made some tweaks, because when I saw things live, I didn't really like them. So I went back a few steps and had an overall vision of the project, and this helped me very much in defining what the story is along with the way I wanted to represent it. And the last thing that I want to walk you through is the motion design and choreography part. I would say that this is really the most important thing. And nowadays, our screens allow for richer and more complex animations and experiences. So the layout part is almost is important, of course, but the motion design part and the choreography part is, I think, is really unavoidable, and is really maybe it's more important nowadays than the static layouts, you know. And so motion design and choreography is something that people really have to take into consideration to create a complete experience. So, for example, how should things move? How should things together move? For example, in a choreography, multiple elements of the interface, how should they move? And so I created these little prototypes to think about that, and I decided to take into consideration just the things that I tried and that resonated with me. And as you see in these screens, there's a lot of difference between what you see as things that is not moving. So, for example, as a static layout that you do in design softwares, versus something like this that is moving, that is creating an atmosphere. And that's because motion, that is the most important thing, is seductive, right? As Johan was saying, is something that creates the element of surprise, something that gives you the sensation of not knowing, what's coming next. So that is the element of surprise. And of course, in a digital experience, motion draws our attention on one point that we want to stress out in that moment, in that specific moment. And another really important thing is that motion can establish tone, can establish narrative, can establish hierarchy. So really, having done this prototyping part, it was really important for me to really understand how the story went along with my designs. And yeah, I think that's all, because I basically shown you what could be all the phases of designing an experience, and I hope that this can help you. And that's my Twitter. So if you want to contact me, that's the way. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.